A single bullet can change the world, but what happens when it misses? Throughout history, dozens of assassination attempts have failed, and the survivors went on to reshape nations, start wars, and alter the course of humanity. Some walked away with minor injuries, others weren't so lucky. Here are the failed assassination attempts that changed everything. Andrew Jackson, March 30, 1835. Richard Lawrence approaches President Andrew Jackson outside the U.S. Capitol building. He raises a pistol and pulls the trigger. The gun misfires. Lawrence pulls out a second pistol. That gun misfires too. Jackson, 67 years old and furious, charges at his would-be assassin with his walking cane and beats him to the ground. Witnesses later testified that Jackson had to be pulled off Lawrence to prevent him from killing the man with his bare hands. Lawrence, a house painter, believed he was the rightful king of England and that Jackson was preventing him from claiming his throne. He spent the rest of his life in mental institutions. The incident made Jackson even more popular with the American public, who saw him as invincible. Experts later tested both pistols and found they worked perfectly. The odds of both misfiring were estimated at 1 in 125,000. Some historians believe divine intervention saved Jackson that day. Others call it pure luck. Either way, Jackson survived to complete his presidency and solidify American expansion westward. Napoleon III, January 14, 1858. Emperor Napoleon III and his wife are traveling to the Paris Opera in their carriage. Italian revolutionary Felice Orsini and 3 accomplices throw bombs at the imperial procession. 3 bombs explode in rapid succession. Shrapnel tears through the crowd. 8 people die instantly. Over 140 are wounded, many severely. The emperor's carriage is damaged, but he and his wife escape with minor cuts. They proceed to the opera as planned, covered in other people's blood. Orsini wanted to assassinate Napoleon III because he believed the emperor was blocking Italian unification. The attack backfired spectacularly. Instead of weakening Napoleon, it gave him justification to crack down on political opponents and strengthen his authoritarian rule. Orsini and 1 accomplice were guillotined 2 months later. But the attack had an unexpected consequence. Napoleon III, moved by Orsini's final letter pleading for Italian freedom, secretly began supporting Italian independence. By 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was established, partly because a failed assassination convinced an emperor to change his foreign policy. Abraham Lincoln, August 1864. President Lincoln is riding alone on horseback at night near the soldiers' home in Washington. A shot rings out. The bullet passes through Lincoln's hat but misses his head by inches. Lincoln's horse bolts and he races back to safety. He later jokes about the incident, calling it an accident by a careless hunter. His bodyguards don't believe him. They find the bullet hole in his hat and realize someone tried to kill him. Lincoln refused to take the threat seriously. He believed that if someone really wanted him dead, there was nothing he could do to stop them. He continued traveling without adequate security. This casual attitude toward his own safety would prove fatal 9 months later when John Wilkes Booth succeeded where the midnight shooter failed. The 1864 attempt remains mysterious. No one was ever identified or arrested. Some historians suggest it was a Confederate sympathizer testing Lincoln's route. Others believe it was a warning shot. Lincoln himself took it as a reminder that every day might be his last, but he refused to live in fear. Alexander II, April 4, 1866. Tsar Alexander II is walking in St. Petersburg when student Dmitry Karakozov approaches and fires a revolver at point-blank range. A peasant named Osip Komisarov strikes Karakozov's arm just as he pulls the trigger. The bullet goes wide. The Tsar is unharmed. Komisarov becomes a national hero and is granted nobility. Karakozov is executed by hanging. This was the first of several attempts on Alexander's life. The Tsar had recently freed Russia's serfs and implemented reforms that angered both radicals and conservatives. Radicals thought he didn't go far enough. Conservatives thought he went too far. For the next 15 years, revolutionary groups plotted his death. Alexander survived poisoning, derailments, and bombings. His paranoia grew with each attempt. He became increasingly isolated and authoritarian, reversing many of his earlier reforms. The failed attempts created the very conditions that would lead to his eventual assassination in 1881. When a bomb finally killed him on a St. Petersburg street. Queen Victoria, May 29, 1842. Queen Victoria is riding in her carriage near Buckingham Palace when 18-year-old John Francis points a pistol at her. The gun doesn't fire. Francis disappears into the crowd. The next day, Victoria deliberately uses the same route as bait. Francis appears again and fires. The pistol misfires again. This time, police arrest him immediately. He's sentenced to death, later commuted to transportation to Australia. This was the second of 8 assassination attempts on Victoria during her reign. Most were carried out by mentally unstable individuals seeking attention. Victoria refused to change her public schedule after any attempt. She believed showing fear would empower her enemies. Her courage made her immensely popular with the British public. Each failed attempt strengthened the monarchy's position rather than weakening it. Victoria's survival through 8 assassination attempts over 6 decades helped transform the British monarchy from a political target into a beloved national symbol. Otto von Bismarck, July 13, 1874. A young man named Eduard Kuhlmann approaches Otto von Bismarck on a street in Bad Kissingen. He fires 2 shots at the Prussian chancellor. Both bullets hit Bismarck but fail to penetrate deeply. One lodges in his ribs, the other is stopped by his clothing. Bismarck, 59 years old, remains standing and conscious. He helps identify his attacker before seeking medical treatment. Kuhlmann was a Catholic Cooper who opposed Bismarck's Kulturkampf policies against the Catholic Church. The assassination attempt gave Bismarck exactly what he needed: public sympathy and political ammunition to intensify his campaign. He used the attack to justify harsher measures against Catholic organizations and political opponents. Kuhlmann was sentenced to 14 years in prison. The failed assassination actually accelerated the policies it was meant to stop. Bismarck recovered fully and continued as chancellor for another 16 years, overseeing the unification of Germany and establishing it as Europe's dominant power. Theodore Roosevelt, October 14, 1912. Former President Theodore Roosevelt is about to give a campaign speech in Milwaukee. Saloonkeeper John Schrank shoots him in the chest at close range. The bullet passes through Roosevelt's steel eyeglass case and the folded 50-page speech in his coat pocket before lodging in his chest muscle. Roosevelt staggers but doesn't fall. He touches his lips, sees no blood, and realizes the bullet missed his lung. Roosevelt insists on delivering his speech before seeking medical attention. He speaks for 90 minutes with a bullet in his chest. He tells the crowd, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." The audience is stunned. Doctors later determined that removing the bullet would be more dangerous than leaving it in. Roosevelt carries the bullet in his chest for the rest of his life. Schrank claimed William McKinley's ghost told him to kill Roosevelt. He spent the rest of his life in mental institutions. The assassination attempt made Roosevelt a legend but didn't win him the election. He lost to Woodrow Wilson. Still, his defiant speech with a bullet in his chest became one of the most iconic moments in American political history. Vladimir Lenin, August 30, 1918. Lenin has just finished giving a speech at a factory in Moscow. As he walks to his car, Fania Kaplan approaches from the crowd and fires 3 shots. 2 bullets hit Lenin, one in his shoulder, one in his neck near his lung. He collapses. His bodyguards rush him to the Kremlin. Surgeons operate, but decide leaving the bullets in is safer than trying to remove them. Kaplan, a socialist revolutionary, opposed Lenin's dissolution of the Constituent Assembly and his authoritarian policies. She was nearly blind from a previous imprisonment but managed to shoot him at close range. The Bolsheviks arrested her immediately. 3 days later, she was executed by firing squad in a trial. Her body was destroyed to prevent it from becoming a symbol. Lenin survived, but his health never fully recovered. The bullets remained in his body and likely contributed to the strokes that killed him 6 years later. More importantly, the failed assassination gave Lenin and the Bolsheviks justification to launch the Red Terror, a campaign of mass executions and political repression that killed tens of thousands. A failed assassination attempt ended up triggering one of history's bloodiest purges. Benito Mussolini, April 7, 1926. Violet Gibson, a 50-year-old Irish woman, approaches Mussolini as he leaves a medical congress in Rome. She pulls out a revolver and shoots him in the face at point-blank range. The bullet grazes his nose, creating a superficial wound. Mussolini's supporters grab Gibson and nearly lynch her on the spot. Mussolini, bandaged and defiant, appears in public hours later to show he's unharmed. Gibson was deeply religious and believed Mussolini was the Antichrist. She had a history of mental illness and had attempted suicide multiple times. Italian authorities wanted to execute her, but Mussolini, seeking good relations with Britain, deported her instead. She spent the rest of her life in a British mental institution. This was one of 4 assassination attempts on Mussolini in 1926 alone. Each failed attempt was used by the fascist regime to justify increased authoritarianism, censorship, and political violence. The attacks made Mussolini appear invincible and strengthened his cult of personality. By surviving multiple assassination attempts, Mussolini convinced many Italians he was destined to rule. Adolf Hitler, November 8, 1939. Georg Elser plants a time bomb in a Munich beer hall, where Hitler is scheduled to give his annual speech commemorating the beer hall putsch. The bomb is set to explode at 9:20 p.m. Hitler finishes his speech early due to fog delaying his train back to Berlin and leaves at 9:07 p.m. 13 minutes later, the bomb explodes, killing 8 people and injuring over 60. Hitler is already on his train. Miles away, Elser, a carpenter and communist sympathizer, spent over a month secretly hollowing out a pillar and installing the bomb. He acted entirely alone, though the Nazis initially blamed British intelligence. Elser was arrested at the Swiss border with bomb-making materials. He confessed but was kept in concentration camps rather than executed. Hitler wanted to put him on trial after winning the war. Elser was executed in April 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. His bomb came closer to killing Hitler than any other assassination attempt during the war. If Hitler had stayed 13 more minutes, World War II might have ended years earlier and millions of lives could have been saved. Charles de Gaulle, August 22, 1962. President Charles de Gaulle and his wife are driving through a Paris suburb when gunmen open fire with automatic weapons. The assassins fire over 140 rounds at de Gaulle's Citroën as bullets shatter windows and puncture tires. The driver maintains control and accelerates through the ambush. De Gaulle and his wife duck but remain calm. They escape without injury. Only 2 bullets actually entered the passenger compartment. One passed between de Gaulle and his wife's heads, missing them by inches. The attack was organized by the Organisation Armée Secrète, a far-right paramilitary group opposed to Algerian independence. This was the most serious of over 30 assassination attempts on de Gaulle's life. The OAS was furious that de Gaulle, once a supporter of French Algeria, had granted Algeria independence. The failed assassination led to a massive crackdown on the OAS. Its leaders were arrested, executed, or fled into exile. The attack's failure actually helped de Gaulle. Public sympathy surged and he used it to justify constitutional reforms that strengthened presidential power. By surviving, de Gaulle consolidated his authority and completed France's decolonization process. George Wallace, May 15, 1972. Alabama Governor George Wallace is campaigning for president at a shopping center in Maryland. Arthur Bremer pushes through the crowd and fires 5 shots at Wallace at close range. 4 bullets hit Wallace. 1 severs his spinal cord. Wallace collapses, paralyzed from the waist down. He survives but never walks again. Bremer, a mentally unstable buzzboy, originally planned to assassinate President Nixon but couldn't get close enough. He chose Wallace as an easier target. Bremer was sentenced to 53 years in prison and served 35 before being released. Wallace continued his presidential campaign from his hospital bed, but his paralysis ended his political viability as a national candidate. The assassination attempt transformed Wallace personally. He spent his later years renouncing his segregationist past and seeking forgiveness from the black community. A man who had stood in schoolhouse doors to block integration spent his final decades in a wheelchair, reconciling with his victims. The bullets that paralyzed him may have also awakened his conscience. Gerald Ford, September 5, 1975. President Gerald Ford is walking through a crowd in Sacramento when Lynette Squeaky, from a follower of Charles Manson, points a Colt .45 pistol at him. Secret Service agent Lamberdorf sees the gun and grabs it. He discovers the chamber is empty. Fromm forgot a chamber around. Ford is unharmed. Fromme is arrested immediately. Just 17 days later, September 22, 1975, Ford is leaving a hotel in San Francisco. Sarah Jane Moore fires a revolver at him from 40 feet away. A bystander, Oliver Sipple, grabs her arm just as she fires. The bullet misses Ford and hits a building. Moore fires a second shot that ricochets off the pavement. Ford is rushed into his limousine unharmed. Moore is arrested and later sentenced to life in prison. 2 assassination attempts in 17 days made Ford the only president to survive 2 separate assassination attempts by women. Both attackers were mentally unstable and acting alone, but their attempts created a security crisis. The Secret Service completely overhauled presidential protection protocols. Ford became more isolated from the public, campaigning behind bulletproof glass and avoiding open crowds. The attempts didn't change policy, but they changed the presidency itself. After Ford, no president could casually walk through crowds or travel without military-level security. The failed assassinations of 1975 created the modern presidential security bubble. Pope John Paul II, May 13, 1981. Pope John Paul II is greeting pilgrims in St. Peter's Square when Mehmet Ali Aka fires 4 shots from a Browning 9mm pistol. 2 bullets hit the Pope in his abdomen. 2 others hit bystanders. The Pope collapses into his 8 of arms. He's rushed to Gemelli Hospital where surgeons operate for 5 hours. He survives but loses 75% of his blood. 1 bullet came within millimeters of his abdominal aorta. If it had hit, he would have bled out in minutes. Aka was a Turkish extremist with possible connections to Bulgarian and Soviet intelligence, though this was never proven conclusively. He claimed he ordered to kill the Pope, but his testimony was inconsistent. The Pope survived and attributed his survival to the Virgin Mary. The assassination attempt occurred on the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. 2 years later, John Paul II visited AK in prison and forgave him publicly. The assassination attempt made the Pope a global icon of forgiveness and strengthened the Catholic Church's moral authority during the final decade of the Cold War. Some historians believe the Pope's survival and subsequent influence helped accelerate the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. Ronald Reagan, March 30, 1981. President Reagan is leaving the Washington Hilton Hotel after giving a speech. John Hinckley Jr. fires 6 shots in 17 seconds. The first shot hits Press Secretary James Brady in the head. The second shot hits police officer Thomas Delahanty. The third shot hits Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy in the chest. The fourth shot hits the presidential limousine. The fifth shot hits the bulletproof window. The sixth shot ricochets off the limousine and hits Reagan in the chest, puncturing his lung and stopping an inch from his heart. Reagan doesn't realize he's been shot. He thinks he injured his ribs when Secret Service agent Jerry Parr shoved him into the limousine. Only when Reagan coughs up bright red blood does Parr realize the president is hit. They divert to George Washington University Hospital. Reagan walks into the emergency room before collapsing. Surgeons remove the bullet and stabilize him. He survives but loses half his blood volume. He's 70 years old, the oldest president to survive an assassination attempt. Hinckley was obsessed with actress Jodie Foster and believed assassinating the president would impress her. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent decades in psychiatric hospitals. James Brady, shot in the head, survived but was permanently disabled. His wife later led the can for the Brady Bill, which mandated federal background checks for gun purchases. A failed assassination attempt changed gun control policy in America and showed the world that Reagan was tougher than anyone expected. He joked with doctors before surgery, saying, "I hope you're all Republicans." His humor and survival boosted his approval ratings and gave him political capital to push through his economic agenda. Margaret Thatcher, October 12, 1984. The British Conservative Party is holding its annual conference at the Grand Hotel in Brighton. At 20:04 a.m., a bomb explodes in the hotel. The blast tears through multiple floors. 5 people are killed, including a member of parliament. Over 30 are injured. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's bathroom is destroyed, but she's in her bedroom working on a speech. She's unharmed. 6 hours later, she gives her scheduled conference speech on time, refusing to show fear. The Provisional IRA planted the bomb weeks earlier, hiding it behind bathroom paneling on a long delay timer. Patrick Magee, an IRA volunteer, was later convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. He served 14 years before being released under the Good Friday Agreement. Thatcher's survival and her defiant response strengthened her political position. The attack unified the Conservative Party and generated public sympathy. The IRA issued a chilling statement. "Today we were unlucky, but remember, we only have to be lucky once. You will have to be lucky always." Thatcher remained prime minister for 6 more years, but the Brighton bombing marked a turning point. It showed that even the most protected leaders were vulnerable to patient, determined attackers. Jair Bolsonaro, September 6, 2018. Brazilian presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro was being carried on supporters' shoulders through a crowd in Juiz de Fora when Adelio Bispo de Oliveira lunges forward and stabs him in the abdomen with a knife. The blade penetrates Bolsonaro's intestines. He's rushed to a hospital where surgeons perform emergency surgery. He survives but requires multiple additional surgeries and carries a colostomy bag for months. De Oliveira was a former member of a leftist political party and claimed he was acting on orders from God. He was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and committed to a psychiatric facility. The assassination attempt transformed Bolsonaro's campaign. Public sympathy surged. His opponents couldn't attack him while he recovered. He won the election 2 months later, becoming Brazil's president. Many analysts believe the stabbing, not his policies, won him the presidency. A failed assassination attempt put a far-right populist in power and changed the direction of South America's largest nation. Donald Trump, July 13, 2024. Former President Donald Trump is speaking at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Shots ring out. Trump grabs his ear and drops behind the podium. Secret Service agents surround him. 1 bullet grazed his right ear. Another killed a spectator in the crowd. 2 others were seriously wounded. The shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, was positioned on a rooftop 130 yards away. He fired multiple rounds with an AR-15 style rifle before being killed by Secret Service snipers. Trump stood up seconds later, blood streaming down his face, and raised his fist to the crowd, shouting, "Fight, fight, fight." The image became instantly iconic. Security failures were immediately apparent. How did a gunman get that close with a rifle? Investigations revealed multiple lapses in coordination between Secret Service and local law enforcement. Trump survived by turning his head at the exact moment the shot was fired. If he'd remained still, the bullet would have struck his skull. The assassination attempt dominated headlines for weeks and reshaped the presidential campaign. Whether it changes the outcome of American history remains to be seen. These stories share a common thread: survival transformed victimhood into power. Leaders who survived assassination attempts often emerge stronger, using the attacks to justify political crackdowns, policy changes, or military actions. The bullets that missed didn't just fail to kill. They changed the world in ways the assassins never intended. History remembers the attempts that succeeded, but the ones that failed shaped just as much. Every survivor became a symbol. Every failed bullet became a turning point. Comment below your city so I know where in the world you're watching from, and tell me which story I should cover next.